Oh, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Borg Skeptic channel. I know I've been away for a couple of weeks now. I've been quite busy, so I'm actually quite excited to get back tonight. Not really a serious episode. It's going to be a little bit more laid back. Just three people sat having a drink and discussing Star Trek and religion. So please sit back and enjoy. And I will be getting into some more serious topics again. Actually, this Saturday, I've got a debate between Scott Williamson and I think it's Cindy who is going to be debating. So definitely tune in for that. I will bring in the guests for tonight. So to discuss Star Trek and religion, I have Scott Williamson and Bryce Roney joining me. How are you two doing tonight?
Doing great.
Doing wonderful.
Yeah, so Star Trek and religion. Now,
Yes.
some people might be thinking there's not a lot of religion in there. It's a pretty atheist sort of series, but I think due to that, they actually, the times that they talk about religion, they do have a very interesting stance on it.
Yeah, I actually think religion is prominently featured in, at least in certain episodes of every Star Trek show that I've watched. And they deal with it in different ways. I mean, Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, he was an atheist and probably one of the few open atheists, in Hollywood at the time, who it was well known that he was. And his presentation of religion is probably what you would expect it to be from someone who was an atheist, more of an objective view of this is how religions work, this is how people in religions behave, this is why they have some of the ideas that they do. And so he would have episodes dealing with whatever alien race that was practicing a religion that, of course, the crew are humans and from the Enterprise discover these backwards aliens and like, oh, they're completely backwards. They still believe in blah 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 blah, right? So that's kind of how Gene Roddenberry interpreted religion, as this sort of backwards thing that only a primitive alien culture would still partake in. And then, of course, by the time they advanced to having warp drive and meeting traveling the stars and everything, they would have advanced beyond the need for gods and worship and religion and all this sort of thing. So that was kind of his take on it, and that's pretty prominent in the original series and also throughout most of the Next Generation as well. None of the crew members who are humans anyway are religious. If you do see religion, it's always like from an alien character who practices some strange religion. And this is kind of Gene Roddenberry's way of talking about religion without implicating specific religions that we practice here on Earth. So he could get away with this because he wasn't really offending anybody, by saying this is what's wrong with the Catholic Church or this is what's wrong with Jehovah's Witnesses. He would be like, no, in this alien race's weird religion, you can see what's wrong with it, and that's why we shouldn't do that. And that's kind of how Gene Roddenberry did it.
And if then anybody does say, oh, well, you're just attacking religion, obviously they've seen a similarity between this fictional society and their religion and the religion that they say that they're worshipping. There was actually no actual connection made in the actual show, so it just shows
it depends
the
on how they
similarities
take it.
and the problems. Yeah.
It depends on how they take it, because if they're defensive about it, if they just think religion is something to be defended because they're religious, then they could see it as, okay, this guy's just attacking religion and he's not paying attention to what they teach and he's not treating them fairly and da. But if they see it as he intended them to see it, which was, this is why you should be careful about indoctrination, they would come to a different belief. I think what Gene Roddenberry did by presenting it in the way that he did was confuse a lot of people who are religious, because there's a lot of religious people who are Star Trek fans. And I think that the way that they can be Star Trek fans is they can say, okay, well, clearly that religion is wrong. That's a ridiculous religion, and nobody would ever practice that sort of thing. But my religion is special, and that one, it's better than that. We're not that backwards. So So they recognize it as him saying something about the wrong religions, but not religion in and of itself.
Yeah. After Gene Roddenberry passed, later on, I think the rules kind of changed a little bit, and they started to, entertain certain ideas, but it was always in the spirit of Gene Roddenberry's envision of the future. So you never really saw like a religious sort of theme at all. It was always, technology and human progress is correlated to no religion and no sort of, and even you could see certain, I would say they're kind of like symbols of religion, like the Borg and things like that. Some people could interpret it that way. Like, this is kind of bad. These people that lock you into a matrix and, and everybody kind of follows the queen bee and, have this sort of Borg mentality. The Borg mentality became a word. I remember that. And even with Jehovah's Witnesses, we used to always joke around sometimes and, sometimes we're like the Borg, man, like it was always like that comparison.
You did that when you were still a witness?
Yeah, I think that kind of shows like a kind of Freudian slip, maybe, like a unconscious concern that was going on in people's head in the background. Like, why would we say that? But it was always done in like just a jokingly jesting way.
Maybe that's why they didn't want you watching Star Trek.
Right.
Because you would figure it out. We're too close to the Borg,
So I guess he was kind of right in the end. He was kind of right. It was kind of a show that was sort of corrupting the minds of the youth. They're like, yeah, we know it's cool, but, Satan has a way of using, nice, entertaining shows in order to mislead you into destruction. I mean, that's his whole goal, is to kind of present you with some candy, some eye candy. And Star Trek was that eye candy. It felt good. So they were like, yeah, maybe parents should reconsider letting their children watch such things, So,
if you believe in Satan, then Satan can do everything, right? Which I never really understood this idea that God created Satan and then sent him to Earth to tempt man for reasons, when he didn't have to do that, he chose to do that, but he clearly sent a superior, more powerful being on Earth to corrupt a weaker, less intelligent being, which he would be successful at doing. Why did God do this?
How was that fair?
But speaking of Satan, do you remember the Star Trek episode with the woman who was pretending to be the devil to this planet? She had like disguised herself as their version of the devil, and she was using their religious text to kind of impersonate the devil, and completely manipulated their whole
technology
society.
She
was using advanced technology to simulate like all these supernatural powers, and they couldn't explain it like with their science. And so, but she was doing it in such a way that it emulated what their religion said. So they just interpreted it as, okay, these are the final days. This is the devil returning to collect dues or whatever the case may. I think it's called Devil's Due. I think that's the name of the episode. But it was very interesting to me because I always looked at that as being akin to the real devil. When people say the devil made me do it, or that's just the devil messing with you. The devil's like this scapegoat that's not real. It's always a human behind the strings. There's always a human behind the screen pulling the strings and doing the wrong and blaming it on the devil, and in this episode there was clearly a person who was disguising themselves as the devil.
I find we used to always think, when it comes to the devil, so like in Christianity you've got the devil, in you had Loki in the Scandinavian religions, and in Marvel. Egyptians had their own, and the Greeks had their own, and it's always portrayed as a deceiver, as a prankster, that sort of mentality, which I always found quite interesting. Because obviously, as you say, if you just put it as it's always a human behind the mask,
Right.
It's sort
And
of
humans deceive. Humans have motivation to deceive. They have motivation of using people's, beliefs against them, whether they're true beliefs, false beliefs, whatever. So clearly the devil is a person pretending to be a religious figure. That's what seems to be the case most of the time. But it's a common theme throughout these religions, and I think that Star Trek did a good job of illustrating that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we used to think of the Devil's Due, and then also not a Star Trek episode, but even going back to the Wizard of Oz. They used to say, yeah, those sort of shows are just Satan is trying to illustrate how religion, the truth, is really a facade, and it's man-made, and just to sow doubt in your mind, just to say, wait a minute, maybe this Bible and story and narrative is all just kind of man-made stuff. And so they're sort of illustrating that with a story of people with this, super technology to fool people, and people start worshiping them. They says, but really, that's just another one of, ironically, it's really the devil behind all of that. In the real life, it's again, everything gets attributed to the devil. Anything that goes against their ideas, even if it's just a make-believe idea, they're so insecure about it that they feel like it's an attack on their religion. It's persecution complex.
Well, I would probably agree with them that it is often an attack on their religion, because I attack the religion. I'm one of the people doing the attacking, usually on purpose. But sometimes it's benign. Sometimes it's just, in psychology, there's a saying, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. You know what I mean? This is what Freud. I think there's a Star Trek episode about that as well. Isn't there some holodeck episode where Data's in the holodeck, and then Sigmund Freud's like, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Anyway, so sometimes we're just watching it for entertainment, but the insecurity of their religious beliefs is seeing things that isn't necessarily even there. They just know that, they've done it before. They've gone after religion. So this episode about salamanders must be about my religion.
Yeah. They said the same with Jurassic Park. They made dinosaurs look like these meat-eating animals, when we know that sin didn't enter the world until Adam and Eve.
My God, are you serious?
And dinosaurs ate plants. They weren't evil. Is
that what they teach?
Oh yeah, they
all of them, even so there were no carnivores among the dinosaurs?
If they were, because I always wonder, I used to always ask them, so why did they have big teeth? Like, what was the point of them having big claws and big teeth? Oh, well, they were scavengers. Even the science says that T-Rex was probably a scavenger and used to eat dead corpses. They didn't eat live animals, because that would be evil, and God doesn't do evil things, and that was after the fall.
This is more if that's the official teaching of the church. This is just more evidence that they don't understand science or evolution or even the logic of their own argument. If you're saying that he had big teeth because he was a scavenger, then the next obvious question is, well, why was he a scavenger if he could eat plants?
Right.
They don't have an answer to that. They didn't think it through properly.
Yeah.
What I liked with the dinosaurs, the thing was, if you go back to you'll probably remember this, Scott, when we were Jehovah's Witnesses, how they used to have the imagery of the flood, the great flood in the Bible, and there was just this odd dinosaur just floating in the water.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious about this. You guys were both witnesses before. Maybe you can answer this for me from the Jehovah's Witness perspective. And I know we're getting a little bit away from Star Trek, but since I have both of you here, the flood story, what is the explanation for the disappearance of the dinosaurs, according to Jehovah's Witnesses?
Jehovah's Witnesses say they went extinct before Adam and Eve came on the scene. So they're old Earth creationists.
Oh, okay. I did not realize. So all Jehovah's Witnesses are old Earth creationists.
Yeah.
Got it. Learn something new every day.
And it does depend though, Scott, because if you remember the arguments for why there was dinosaurs in the imagery was because some Jehovah's Witness teachings said that the dinosaurs actually died in the flood.
That's true. That's true. You know,
and I know that's a prominent position in mainstream Christianity, that a lot of them will explain it. Well, they died in the flood, you know. But this is what I don't understand. If the dinosaurs died in the flood, what was the point of the ark? Wasn't it to save the animals? Like,
all animals.
That's the whole reason Noah built it, right?
Yep.
To save every species. If all the dinosaurs died in the flood, then he failed.
Right.
He failed the whole.
He didn't like the dinosaurs.
I guess not.
Yeah, they became evil.
They became evil.
They were part of the rebellious sons that didn't listen to the message. I guess.
How dare any creature can just do what it was made to do? That's
that is something, by the way, that Star Trek often gets wrong. For as many things as they get right, they also, like religion, gets evolution wrong a lot. There have been Star Trek episodes talking about evolution where I think there's one episode in The Next Generation where the crew starts de-evolving. Well, that's not a thing,
Right.
De-evolving. And then they start going back and they start changing from like whatever species they were to whatever they supposedly evolved from. But that's not how evolution works either. It's not one animal changing into another. And I used to watch these episodes with these stories when I was a kid, and I was like, wow, Star Trek is so scientific and advanced, and I love this show because it's teaching me about science. And then I learned science. I'm like, ooh, they screwed up.
No, they screwed up on a lot of things, but they were so ahead of their time on other concepts like teleportation and a lot of things that are now coming to be at least theoretically possible in principle. And then you see them do that little thing where they're, hey, beam me up, Scotty. It's looks like a daggone cell phone.
Yeah, I have one of those, by the way.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, actually, I should probably grab it.
Yeah.
There you go. You talking about one of these?
Yeah. Look like a flip phone.
Yeah, it works too. It's like actually.
Wow, that's cool, man.
I'm a super nerd.
Yep. Warp drive, a lot of concepts they had that were just ahead of their time that scientists are entertaining up till today.
Yeah.
They built transparent aluminum. Do you remember that from Star Trek 4? Where they go back in time and they have to figure out a way to bring the whales back. And
so save the whales.
Yeah, so they make a deal with this plexiglass guy, and they're like, we'll tell you how to make transparent aluminum. And then Bones is like, well, we can't tell him. We're changing the future. And Scotty's like, well, how do you know he didn't invent it? Right? And then lo and behold, a few years later, they've actually invented it.
Wow, yeah. I haven't seen that one in a long time, buddy.
That's a fun one.
Yeah.
Well, they're actually they're developing holodeck holograms and shit like that now, aren't they, as well? And
VR stuff.
Yeah,
I heard that would be if we build a holodeck like as it's depicted on Star Trek, that might be the last invention. If we have the holodeck and the replicators, we don't need anything else going forward.
No, teleportation, I suppose, because they are working on that as well. The 3-point teleportation, the same as what you had in Star Trek.
Those three inventions pretty much make it so that science maybe probably stop. The only thing we would do in real life is try to avoid like disasters, like asteroid strikes or the zombie apocalypse or whatever, the new coronavirus. But science would only be used to like stop things that could kill us, because everybody would just be content and in their home like all the time with unlimited food, unlimited power,
and artificial intelligence. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
The ship was very intelligent artificially, so used to talk back and give advice and
I mean, it seemed like way smarter back when I was a kid, like when the Enterprise would be talking, because we didn't have Alexa and Siri and all these different. I was about to say people. We didn't have all these. We didn't have this technology then, and so the idea of computers talking back to you. I watched Star Trek all the time, but I used to watch the show called Knight Rider as well, where it was about a
Mhm.
guy who had a car that
Yep.
would speak.
Talking car, yeah.
Yeah, and so I thought this was like would be amazing technology, and then we get to now, and we have something similar. It's not quite as advanced as as it was depicted in the show, but this was supposed to be like 400 years in the future.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
Like
right.
if we have something close to that now, like how far would we actually come in 400 years? It would,
Oh,
if
really?
assuming we make it. I mean, it could be like the Terminator, where they get so smart that they just wipe out all mankind and then we're screwed. But
We
They
did mess
had
up a little
data.
bit though when we replicated the Star Trek computer, the AI, because Alexa and Cortana and Siri, they are so bloody annoying. I don't ever remember the Star Trek computer being
Being
as
quite that
annoying.
annoying.
yeah,
Data kind of reminds me of, I guess something I could point out today would maybe be that Sophia robot that talks, and of course she's very rudimentary
hmm
compared to Data. I mean, Data was, I think, I always wondered, was Data even conscious? I could never tell
I
if they were
like her
trying to make
brother,
him.
the brother robot,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
the one who talks about annihilating humanity.
yeah,
Oh, yeah,
Lore.
yeah,
Sort
yeah,
of does
yeah,
it
yeah.
in jest though. I quite like him.
Hmm.
Um, this thing with artificial intelligence, when you start talking about was data conscious,
Hmm.
um, and I lean more towards the fact that he was, only because
Hmm.
later they started making like emotion chips for him, and then he could
Hmm.
like behave more human and all that. I think there's
Hmm.
a couple episodes where he discovers dreaming, and
Oh,
Yep.
I
it's like
like that
it's like
episode.
a program in his brain. I think he gets electrocuted and engineering or something, and it triggers a circuit
Yeah,
that was dormant, and then he has dreams for the first time.
yeah. He
And
keeps dreaming
um,
about his father with a hammer and an anvil
yep,
in the
yeah,
corridors of the Enterprise.
right.
Hmm.
And he has to interpret what the dream means because the dream doesn't tell him, so he's left to
Hmm.
like inspire on his own. And I'm like, that seems like consciousnly to me.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
That seems
The
like
interesting
consciousness,
thing
and
with
it's a
that
program.
is
It's just a
Deanna
program.
Troy, the ship counselor.
Hmm.
She's
Hmm.
actually counseling him on the dreams.
Hmm.
I was actually reading a paper by one of the people that is making. I think it's the guy who makes Sophia.
Hmm.
Runs the company that makes her.
Yep, I know who you're
Um,
talking about. Hmm.
and he was talking about how in the future, when we finally get the full thinking AI, conscious AI, one of the new jobs that will be in the future for people will be robot counselors, AI counselors,
Hmm.
to actually counsel these robots, because they're going to be conscious, and they're going to have like emotions and
Oh, I'm
stuff that they need
sorry.
to.
So you're saying people to counsel the robot? I thought you meant
Hmm.
Yeah.
robots that were counselors.
No,
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 no.
no. People to
I
actually
was like,
counsel them on how to
okay,
actually deal with the consciousness that they've suddenly found themselves having.
yeah, I heard you say robot counselors, and I'm like, so I'm gonna go to a robot. I'm gonna go to a
A
counselor that's a
robot counselor.
robot, and how's a robot gonna help me? But no, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be. It's funny. I could actually see that happening before what you were just talking about, Katie. I could
Yeah.
see them trying to
Mm.
make robot to save money or whatever, or
Yep.
to cut the
Oh,
human workforce.
you're completely right. They
Well,
have
we could just
already tried it.
program.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there
we could just
was.
program our robot to give the correct, ask the right
Mm,
question to counsel you through
there's
Well, the
whatever.
a
society in
Japanese
that.
company that has made a robot counselor. So it has full facial expressions and everything, and the AI inside it has been built to recognize the smallest of movements in the human face, and then to
Hmm.
replicate those movements, so it can better understand, reading body language. So and so they're starting there to train it as an actual counselor for therapy sessions.
Are they
Wow.
using only Japanese people as their emulators?
I'm not 100% certain on that. I think
Because
at the
that's it.
moment, yes, but because they are a Japanese
Yeah,
company.
yeah. I think that they would be better off to get a multinational, multi-ethnic population to do that, because different groups of people have different responses. You know, some emote more, others are a little bit more internally reserved. Like the Japanese culture and a lot of Asian society tend to be more reserved, you know, but Japan especially. And so if you're programming your robot to recognize emotions by using Japanese people, and then the robot is in America where people like have no hesitation
filter.
about emoting, have no filter, and you know, I don't know that it's probably going to be overwhelmed, or I could see it misinterpreting.
Yeah, big time.
And then how do you train it to understand the British humour? That's
well, we didn't understand humor at all. I mean, I think Data, going back to Star Trek, he didn't really get humor until he had the emotion chip, right?
Yeah,
and they had to like, which I don't know how you make an emotion chip like that. To me, is the biggest, and more than just consciousness, like emotion. How do you create something to experience emotion? It would have to place value on something else in order to have an emotional response to that something, right?
Yeah,
like
it'd have to be a big feedback loop type of algorithm, I guess.
Yeah, like I mean, fear is easy. That's probably the easiest one because sorry, I just dropped this. All you do is you program it to have a sense of self-preservation, right? So basically, if something is programmed to survive at all costs, it's going to do everything it can to avoid death. If it's programmed to function as maximally efficient as it can, it's going to do everything it can to avoid injury, right? And so in a sense, that's a type of fear. It's going to recognize that this situation is dangerous. I need to stay away from that because I need to remain functional. And it may not even know why, other than that's just how it was programmed, right?
Yeah.
Just like us, we don't know why we are afraid of a lot of things. We just are.
We just are, right?
We value our lives, you know.
Love might be another reasonably simple one as well, because love really is just familiarity. So you could, you know, write a program so the more familiar you become with something, the more that
the more you love it,
precious that thing then becomes, the more value you assign to it.
Right. Especially if you can get it to recognize the individuality of the things it's placing value on, you know. If it's something that's like disposable, like a car, where you can just make an identical car that functions exactly the same way, then it might not be effective. But if it's something like we'll just use a person that has a personality that there's only one of and you can't replicate another one, it might be easier to impart that quality of love because now it can see that person as more precious than another, you know, another object that can't be duplicated in the same way.
Well, having said that, I wonder if it would be necessary in that case to give robots a lifespan. Otherwise, they wouldn't value their life, or they wouldn't value certain experiences. Because if they could live forever, I mean,
then nothing is of value.
Nothing's of value, right?
Yeah,
that might
and not only that,
that might be interesting when, you know, well, let's say if, because we don't know if the consciousness in robots is going to be plausible yet. But let's say they do get consciousness, it will be interesting to see what value they put on the term atheism leads to nihilism. You know, whether or not you need a lifespan to, you know, to add value or
value, right?
Yeah, I think that the other advantage of giving them a lifespan, in addition to it being probably in their own interest, so that they can have these sorts of values, is because if they get to the point where they are self-replicating, like where they know how to reproduce themselves, then they may not know when to stop, you know. So there could be a competition issue. They could be competing for resources. There could be problems with overcrowding. You know, there could be a lot of issues going on where you have multitudes of robots all existing and never dying. You know. Yeah,
they'd be too much like human in that case. It'd be like we have a survival drive, like a drive to survive, and that's what makes us want to live forever. And if we were to give robots like a lifespan, but yet these robots were self-learning, self-taught, and they were just, obviously robots are going to be faster at different things as far as learning. I mean, we're getting our ass beat in chess and all these different games. I mean, if they put their computing power to anything, they're going to exponentially just destroy us in a matter of a year, and it's just going to get worse, as time goes on.
Are you
so
talking
I'm thinking,
literally or
yeah, like literally, they'll, like, if we give them these limits, right, these limitations in order to give them value and give them limits, for our safety and theirs, but say, because they're so good at self-learning, I mean, they're artificially intelligent. So they're going to learn, they're going to evolve in a way, and then they're going to finally get to a point where they're going to be like, well, we don't want to be restricted to, 50 years of life or whatever. We want to live forever like you guys do, and then they're going to say, so we're going to figure it out, and we're going to make ourselves live forever, and we're going to, and then I guess that's where the whole doomsday scenario comes in, where then they have like a drive to survive and competition, and that's kind of what, there's some thinkers in AI that say, oh, you don't ever have to worry about that because that only applies to biological systems. We evolved a certain way. Right. That was my question. It's like, well, I understand what you're saying because it's true. It's just a factually true thing. But when you're saying that it doesn't apply to these other things that we haven't even explored yet, how do you know that? Like, how do you know that they won't develop?
A lot of these people are the same people. They view animals differently than humans as well. They say that, well, this sort of thing only applies to humans. Animals have no souls, or they have no spirits, or whatever the case they're saying. How do you know that? If you know it because the book told you so, well, then I don't. I'm not going to argue.
You're already lost.
You believe what you believe for bad reasons, I think. But and if we're using rationalism, you have to be able to say what it is about you that makes you different than this animal, to where you can say you have a soul and it doesn't. Like, what properties are you identifying as the soul that this animal doesn't have?
Exactly.
And by the way, if we build a robot that seems to be able to emulate all of those properties, then does the robot have a soul? Who are you to say that the robot doesn't have a soul?
Right. The same logic applies. So it's like the problem is, like, you're right. The same people. I think I talked to one of these sort of people the other day that was saying, well, animals aren't conscious. They don't. I don't know what you're talking about. They're like, animals are not conscious. I mean, this is, and it just always strikes me as kind of like human centric. It's like everything is so. It's like, just because it's us, like, we're the epitome of everything that's great.
We're
everything
the center of the universe.
Yeah, it's like, isn't that a little bit like that's just a little arrogant on our part. Like, you don't know that. You don't know. And then when you extrapolate that logic to, like you were saying, with AI and stuff like that, we don't know if they're going to have competitive drives, and they can be a danger. We don't know that.
Right, and we're their creator, and we don't know that.
Right.
We didn't create animals, but we claim to know things about them that we couldn't know of our own creation. That's kind of another irony.
Do you remember the episode in Star Trek? What do you call it, Voyager, when the Doctor, the holographic Doctor, is trying to get holographic rights, author rights for writing his holo novel.
Yeah.
I think they covered quite a lot of this in that episode about, like, how we actually categorize what human rights actually are. Or
They've
what
done a
sentient
lot.
rights are.
They did a lot in Star Trek Voyager with the character, the Doctor, because he starts off on that show as basically an automaton, just with pre-programmed responses. But the more they have to rely on him through the seasons, the more rights he starts getting on the show. He gets, like, I think it's like season 2 or 3, he finally gets the right to be able to turn himself off, because one of the things he started growing frustrated with was that people would just leave him on and he would have nothing to do all the time. They wouldn't speak to him like a person. So then the captain changed the rule, said, no, you have to acknowledge his presence because he's the only doctor we have, But in the beginning, they weren't really taking his ideas or suggestions or complaints seriously, because they were only programmed responses. But as he started to learn more and become they started to become more dependent on him and leaving him on all the time, he started learning more and interacting more, and he just became sentient, you know, in such a way that the other holographic characters were not. And I think they did a lot of the episodes, like the one you talked about, where he, you know, it's about his rights as an author. They did another episode where he's simulating having a family in the holodeck.
I was thinking of that one, yeah. That was an interesting one, because he was sick of going into the darkness every time he was turned off.
Right, so something happened to his program in that, because initially the way that he wrote he wrote the program, so you have a computer simulation writing another computer simulation for itself. Only it's sentient, right? But he didn't understand that the way that he wrote the program was too perfect. He wrote real life, but it wasn't real, because everyone is perfect. Then I think one of the other characters went in and watched. He was like, "What are you doing? This isn't how real life goes." Yeah. And so then she redesigned it so that it would be closer to real. Then he goes back in, and his daughter is sick. I think she's dying of some disease, and he's a doctor and he can't cure it. And eventually she dies, and he doesn't know how to deal with that, because that he wasn't prepared for like having an emotional response, or this character placed value on a computer program, but still one that he identified as his daughter that he knew was dying. He couldn't do anything to save and couldn't bring back, you know? And so that made him grow as a character more.
That's what I liked about the whole Star Trek framework, is it was just the kind of framework where you could actually address so many philosophical subjects and ethical subjects, and you could kind of use different alien species as examples to do that. Like the Ferengi, remember the Ferengi? They were really greedy, and
the rules of acquisition.
Yeah, and they'd talk about
You know who the Ferengi are? A lot of people watch Star Trek and they look at like the Federation and Starfleet. What country do you think they usually associate that with?
Russia.
The Federation?
I'm sorry. I was thinking about some the other Ferengi.
Yeah. No, Starfleet, like the human characters. What do you think?
United States.
Yeah, that's what most people want to look at the United States as, except that that's not what the United States is. The United States is the Ferengi.
Yeah, the Ferengi,
I'd say
exactly.
The Federation's more closely married to the European Union.
That would be probably the closest thing that we have to something like a federation. It's still not quite there, but that is a closer model of it. But the United States is not. The United States would be the Ferengi in the Star Trek universe, because it's a capitalist. It's a capitalist society that is about money. Who owns America? Corporations own America. You know, the top 2% owns 90% of the wealth in the country. So that's the American dream, is to be rich.
Yeah, and anyone who's not rich doesn't matter.
In private ownership,
it's all about me. Yeah, it's all about me in America. So not to be not to have a downer note like
anti-American.
I'm American. I served America for many years in the United States military. I'm proud of my service, and I'm proud of our troops. But I'm not always proud of the decisions made by the government, or the decisions made by corporate America. Which
that's Star
what
Trek,
it is.
You'd be the character of Rom.
Yeah. He was a great character. He's one of my favorite characters, actually.
Eventually becomes a Grand Nagus, doesn't he, and changes the Ferengi.
I forgot that. We haven't talked about Deep Space Nine at all.
No, and it's a really good one when it comes to religion.
Yeah, that's where it really came in.
The show. It's the show that really made Star Trek talk about religion, for real. And this is after, of course, Gene Roddenberry was dead by then, so he didn't have the control. And so once he died, I think it was Rick Berman and Michael Piller started writing stories, translating religion into the Star Trek universe, not just from the perspective of a bunch of atheists who were non-religion going to backwards planets, but having main characters be religious, like Major Kira.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it presented. It was interesting to me because it presented religion.
Oh yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say it presented religion as not quite as negative as it had been in the Next Generation or in the original series. There were still some elements of that, but it was much more fair towards religion, I should say, in the way that it evaluated it. Because I mean, I remember when the Bajorans, are obviously religious, and there was a school teacher on Deep Space Nine teaching them science. You remember that?
Yeah.
It was Miles O'Brien's wife. She was a teacher on Deep Space Nine.
I think you're bringing up the point I was just thinking of as well.
Okay. Do you want to do it, or do you want me to finish talking?
Well, I think it's the same
You can
point.
bring it up.
But the terrorist act that took place when she was trying to teach about the wormhole to the school kids. Using like so we could equate that to the secular teaching of science. So she's trying to teach the actual secular scientific explanations as to everything, with actual proof and everything. And the Kai comes along, the religious leader comes along and says, "No, you can't do that. It's blasphemy against the Bajoran faith. So I'm going to have to take all of the Bajoran children out of this class."
Did you see that
you're
one,
willing
Scott?
to teach them that it's all the prophets and the wormhole's actually a temple and all of that.
Right.
Was that like the mirror universe where they?
No,
were...
that was in the Prime universe. It was in one of the earlier seasons of Deep Space Nine. I think it's like in season 1 or 2. But yeah, the Bajoran religious leader was like, "No, it's not a wormhole. It's the celestial temple." And no, they're not aliens. They're the prophets, and you can't teach them we don't want the Bajoran children. We want them to learn the Bajoran faith first, and, you can have your different interpretations of it. But yeah, so there was a schism there between like science and religion. But the weird thing about it is Cisco, his son, he's a student in one of the classes. That and of course he's going with the science teachings because his dad's Starfleet and all that. And he goes to his dad later on in the episode, and he's like, "Can you believe these, Bajoran people? They think that the wormhole is a celestial temple and all that. Like, what a bunch of mumbo jumbo." And then his dad is like, "Well, wait a second. This wormhole, as you call it, it gave the Bajoran people their religion. It gave them orbs, which they used, to inspire them. They have different powers that actually do things, The prophets actually exist. I mean, we call them aliens, but they're non-linear aliens who exist at all points in the space-time continuum simultaneously, so they know the past, present, and future. Why shouldn't they be called prophets, And so it's all just a matter of interpretation then. Like, everything that the Bajoran people believe was actually true. And that was one of the differences between religion as it was presented in that show versus religion in real life, where people are believing in untrue things, or at least things that can't be demonstrated to be true, But their faith was actually real. They were just using religious spirituality and spiritual symbols to interpret everything.
But I think what they did quite effectively in the show, though, was to show how far religion can actually go, whether or not it's got based on something substantial or not. How far, too much you can take religion, because these wormhole aliens, prophets, whichever we call them, had no recollection of Bajor. They didn't know Bajor even existed. When Cisco first approaches them.
I think that they did. I watched that episode recently. That was the pilot episode. And I think that they call it differently, but they stopped Cisco from going to the other side of the worm. He went to the other side and then tried to come back, but they stopped him. And they said, every time you come through this passage, you interfere with us, and now you're interfering with our children or whatever. So they did identify them. They didn't call them Bajorans, and I don't think you knew necessarily that that's who they were talking about at the time.
Oh yeah.
But then in later episodes, they certainly elaborated on that to say because I think Cisco's mother was a wormhole alien, like at the end of the series. Yeah. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's why he.
God damn, I'm such a nerd.
They take him into the temple, and
I'm like,
he becomes.
Yeah, do I really remember?
A god,
didn't you probably know this? Didn't Ferengi have like a spiritual leader like Zach or?
Oh, that
they
was
had the
Grand
Grand
Nagus.
Grand
that was
Nagus,
more-
right?
Their
Exactly.
religion
Yeah.
was based on commerce, so it was basically capitalism. So he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't so much like a religious leader. He was just
He was more like the Pope, but
Mhm.
without
Yeah.
like the religious, without like the supernatural stuff.
Right.
Like
right.
he was a revered figure. He had a scepter too, like the Pope, I think.
yeah.
Well, I know
They had to kiss the scepter and everything.
They had to kiss it,
But
that's
I
right.
remember there was one show. Oh, it's been so long when I saw that a few years ago, where he was looking for like this orb of the prophets,
Hmm.
and it basically gave him the new rules of acquisition as a gift. So he kind of de-evolved him to a more primitive state, resembling the less greedy ancestors of the Ferengi.
I don't remember that one offhand, but that sounds like a great episode.
Yeah, it was a cool plot, man. I remember watching that. It was kind of
I
decent.
think that.
Mhm.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, go right ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that almost all of the alien races in Star Trek are presented with some type of religion, except humans. But I mean, when you look at the Vulcans, for example, and they're like super logical and scientific and all that, but a lot of their practices, they're not worshiping anything supernatural, but they have a lot of symbolism and a lot of reverence for tradition, and it's almost like Buddhism.
Yeah, I was about to say the Vulcans always struck me as Buddhists.
Yeah.
Because they did
They're
have
always
temples,
meditating
but it was
and-
temples to logic.
They have temples.
Yeah,
Star Trek
temples to
Enterprise,
logic, yeah.
They visit one
Right.
of the monasteries.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
they actually see the Vulcans as actual monks.
Right.
Yeah,
there and
yeah.
everything.
Burial practices and
Vows of
Yeah.
All of this
silence
stuff.
and all of
They're
that.
super spiritual. For like people who embrace logic, they embrace a lot of religion too. It's just it's different from the religion of the other races because they don't believe in the supernatural or anything.
I always liked the Klingons because the Klingons had it was Valhalla basically, Sto-Vo-Kor. So it was very
Yeah.
much like the Vikings.
The Vikings.
Yeah.
Aaron
Yeah.
Raw.
I think didn't the Klingons kill their gods because they were
Yes.
unworthy?
Yes, they did. Yeah.
They're so
yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think
the
that
gods,
every
stopped wanting to. They gave them a decree to stop engaging in war with each other, and the Klingons didn't like that, so they killed their own
No.
gods.
They said, "Yeah, go fuck
Yeah.
yourself." Yeah, but they still have a Jesus figure because they had Kahless the
Kahless.
Unforgettable, who was like the greatest Klingon warrior, and all their lessons come from Kahless. So he's basically like the Jesus of the Klingon religion. Right?
He was a badass
Who
Jesus.
actually comes back, which is interesting. He actually gets the make a clone of him.
right.
He's
The
resurrected.
the second coming of Kahless.
Yeah. Which I
That's
always
funny.
thought was is that like a slang on the second coming of Jesus? Are they doing like a little joke here?
Oh yeah, they did. They
Make
did.
a clone of Jesus and have him come back.
That didn't occur to me. Yeah, I always interpreted it as them. I thought it was a direct reference to, or analogy, I should say, to Jesus and the fact that Jesus will return. But again, in the Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry way, he was doing it in a scientific way. It's kind of like, you guys know Ridley Scott, the
other writer,
Yeah.
science fiction writer. What he did, The Thing.
No, that's John Carpenter, but he did
John
do
Carpenter,
he did
yeah.
he did Alien.
Alien. That's what.
The
I'm thinking
Aliens
of, yeah.
universe, and he did Blade Runner and a few other things as well.
Ridley
he's
Scott,
he's also an atheist like Gene Roddenberry. But the funny thing about him, and you can see bits and pieces of that in the Alien movies that he's done. He did Prometheus and Alien Covenant and the newer Alien movies, and they all touch on religion too, but from the perspective of an atheist. From the perspective of a writer who clearly doesn't believe but recognizes that other people believe. And the funny thing about him is he also made a movie called Exodus: Gods and Kings, which is about the biblical Exodus story, right? It's not one of his better movies. It's actually pretty bad, but but it's interesting to see. I went to the movies to see it, but it was interesting to see his perspective of the story of the Exodus as told through the eyes of an atheist. How does an atheist who doesn't believe in the supernatural or anything write a Bible story about God setting the Israelites free with these miracles,
the angel of death?
Yeah, and so the way he does it is like everything, all of the plagues that happen in Exodus, they happen in this movie, but there's like a scientific explanation behind it, like the migratory patterns of the locusts, or whatever
the iron in
the parting
water.
of the Red Sea wasn't actually a parting of the sea. It was just Moses. He was a brilliant strategist.
Yeah.
But he knew when the tide would be low enough to be able to walk across, and he led the Israelites across at that time. And by the time the Egyptians crossed, it was high tide again, and they all drowned. And so that was his explanation of the parting of the Red Sea. So he's presenting this story as being plausible from a scientific perspective, if you take out all of the supernatural mumbo jumbo. And God, by the way, in the movie is portrayed by like a 10-year-old boy, but Moses is the only one who ever sees him. And so he's talking to him like he's right there, and then someone else comes and then he's not there. So for all we know, this whole thing is happening inside Moses's head where he's talking to God.
That sounds interesting though.
It's an interesting take. It's what you would expect an atheist to write if they were trying to figure out whether or not this story was plausible. And if it is, what are the details that they got wrong, and how do I make this consistent with science and reasoning? And that's pretty much what he did with that movie. But I was saying all that to say, getting back to Star Trek and Gene Roddenberry, I think a lot of the Star Trek writers kind of did the same thing when they used these religious metaphors. And so you have Kahless returning, the second coming of Kahless, but he's returning through cloning, which is a scientific thing. Totally plausible. So if we had some DNA from Jesus, would we be able to clone him?
Yeah.
Well, possibly, but would it be the same person? Would he know anything that Jesus
Yeah,
did?
that opens up
Probably
the ship of Theonesis philosophical problem.
Which I believe when they brought back Kahless in the cloning, he didn't have any memory of being Kahless. They had to teach him everything about Kahless, so they sent him to a monastery because that's where they cloned him, at the monastery. The monks taught him everything that they knew from the old texts of Kahless.
Which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it, because if they have all that information, why don't they just apply it to them? Like, what the hell do they need a Kahless for? They have the information. Anybody could be the new.
It was
Kahless,
the warring houses. There was a constant civil war within the Klingon Empire, so they needed a symbol to bring the houses together, and that's what Kahless was meant to be. The second coming was meant to be the person who was to bring them all together again.
Well, that problem that you brought up about the cloning and the resurrection, and would he be the same person, kind of reminds me of another concept on Star Trek that touches on certain spiritual subjects or whatever with religion, which is the we were talking about this earlier, I think, with the teleportation. And I remember a few years ago, like, I think, at my office, I was working at the time in California. One of the people I worked with was a Zen Buddhist priest guy, and the other one was a Christian, real strong evangelical type. And we started talking about the soul. And, of course, the Buddhist, he doesn't believe.
That must have been a fun conversation.
Oh, man, it was great. It went on all day long. And it was just so great. And one of the main analogies that we all agreed to talk about that was central to the whole discussion was the teleportation of Star Trek. That's what we all kind of rooted it in, right? Like the Christian was saying, well, the Buddhist guy was saying, well, there is no self, there is no soul. That's a Buddhist concept. And so, and he used the teleportation. Like if you were to actually teleport yourself into another world, and let's say the real you stays here, but then a copy of yourself goes over to the planet and has teleported all your atoms over there, a copy of all your atoms over there, are you the same person? And so the whole idea was the Christian would say, oh yeah, they're the same person, because you're teleporting everything about them, their essence, into another place. Mm-hmm. And then the Buddhist is saying, no, well, they may be the same person described physically, but as soon as the person starts walking and having different experiences and life experiences, he's going to diverge from the same person. And so his point was that if you look at science, like in Buddhism, we say that there's nothing but change. Change is the only thing that stays the same in reality. So he was saying, like, and this applies to like physicality. So like, if a person, we shed skin and we change our whole atomic structure after like so many years or something like that. Like, we don't keep our same configuration throughout our entire life. We're always changing and losing and gaining and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And he says, so we're never the same person, really. It's just we have this story of a stream of consciousness that binds it all together. And, it just seems it's an illusion. It's like we're not really the same entity. We're actually different all the time. So there's no soul. That goes against the concept of a soul, and they just argued about it. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting thing.
I don't know what the argument is, because everything that was said there is objectively true. Yeah. All of those statements are 100% accurate, testable, falsifiable.
Well, the Christian is going to disagree, though. It's like, it might seem true, but, in their perspective, there's just this extra thing, called a soul that you have to also factor in, and you're not factoring that in.
Well, there's nothing to factor. That's the thing that we just factored it out by showing you how it doesn't make sense.
That's what the guy was. Yeah, exactly. That's
showed how it works without needing the soul. So why that extra step in? You're just complicating.
And also, not only did we do that, we showed how it works where we don't need a soul, but we also showed how it can't work with a soul.
With a soul, anyways, right?
It can't work with a soul, because if there's a soul, then every time you change, that soul would be dying or have moved on somewhere else, and you'd be getting a new soul.
When theists talk about the hard problem of consciousness, and I'm like,
it doesn't follow.
There was a problem with consciousness. Like, you're adding a step in.
Yeah,
it doesn't solve anything. A lot of them, just to kind of steelman the position a little bit, and this is something I heard from some of my Muslim friends. It's the hard problem in the sense that it's a philosophical problem. It's not really a problem, but it's a dilemma that philosophy posit that can't be scientifically understood. And basically, it's this idea that we can never know. We take solipsism for granted, right? We assume that other minds exist because it's a necessary assumption as far as we know. Well, with consciousness, how do you evaluate consciousness? Can you evaluate it objectively? Well, the answer is no, because your consciousness is different from mine. Katie's is different from yours. Every consciousness theoretically would be different. And so if you try to evaluate someone else's consciousness, you can't experience what they're experiencing. And so you're inherently limited. And also on top of that, you can't objectively evaluate your own consciousness because you're having the experiences, which biases here. So you're having a subjective experience, which means you can't objectively evaluate it. So you don't know if everything's in your head, Yeah,
it's like a scale that tries to weigh itself. It's like, you're operating from within consciousness itself to evaluate and measure consciousness itself. So it gets kind of circular.
That's all they're saying as far as like the problem of consciousness, but it's not a problem in the sense that we need to be compelled enough to solve it by positing one. There is no solution to that. Even if you throw a God in there, you haven't solved the problem.
Well, that's what the argument is, though. The argument is the hard problem of consciousness, therefore God. I mean, essentially.
Yeah. Well,
so, but it doesn't. It doesn't do anything.
No, it doesn't do anything for God at all, because if you as a conscious being have come to the conclusion, therefore God, that's happening in your own consciousness. which you cannot evaluate objectively. So you can't say if any of that is true or false. So you're still stuck in the same boat I am.
Yeah, it's called
You know?
epistemic circularity. It's like,
Yeah.
someone say, well, I know I'm having the experience. Well, how do you know you're having experience? Because I'm having it. It's like it's viciously
Well, that
circular.
is circular, but I adopted
It's true, though.
that one is true because of the fact, like, you don't need to prove that that's true.
Right.
It's proven by virtue of you having an experience. As long as there's an experience that's being had, therefore you. You know, I think, therefore I am. I can't not be, since there's an experience that I am having, you know. Now that is circular, but it's also true, and it requires no demontration. Right. Anything on top of that does, because that's not
inference. That's inference.
You know?
Because that think before I am, I guess, is what you're appealing to, which is that is not a presupposition, despite what a Christian will tell you.
No, it's a necessary fact. You know, if you are thinking, you are.
Yep.
If you're not, you're not thinking.
You couldn't even ask the question.
You couldn't even ask the question, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a presupposition; it's a demonstrable truth. By the way, the name of the episode you were referencing, whether you knew it or not, is called "Second Chances." It's from, I believe, season 5 of The Next Generation, and this is where Commander Riker was beamed up by the transporter years ago, but then it left a copy of him back on the planet, and so there were 2 Rikers, but then one of them was rescued, and then the other was stuck on the planet, and then they run into him years later, and it's the same guy, like, physically, but obviously their experiences, Thomas Riker,
that's right. You're right.
But their experiences changed from the moment the transporter game happened.
Yeah, that's what he was alluding to, that story, right?
Ends up in he eventually ends up in a Cardassian prison camp because he tried to steal the Defiant. And
right. That's in Deep Space. I think they did that on Deep Space Nine. This one. Yeah. So yeah, they carried on his character, and unfortunately, they left us hanging on that one because that storyline didn't really go anywhere. Which I was always disappointed about. I thought they would come back to that.
They come back to it later on in the game, in the Star Trek Online, because there is an episode where on the Star Trek Online where you go and take Riker out of the Cardassian prison.
How much time we got, Katie?
We're at the hour now, but I'm quite happy to continue on the conversation if you want to continue.
I mean, I think some people might criticize us, and you in particular, if we have a Star Trek conversation where we are relating it to religion and none of us mentions Q.
Oh, yes.
That's kind of important. You know?
Now, Q's a deep one, though. You could do an entire episode on
that's
Q.
True.
That's
yeah. I met John Delancey once at a Star Trek convention, which is not relevant to the story at all. But I was saying all that to say he wrote, I don't know if it was in a book or a memoir, but he's quoted somewhere, I got to find the quote, where he says that I'm not a god, but I just played one on TV, you know. And he's also an atheist. He was actually on Truth Wanted with Objectively Damned.
I saw that episode.
Did you see that one?
I did, yeah.
That was not too long ago, and I didn't know that about him, and it was actually a pretty interesting episode. But it's just, I always found a little irony in the fact that John Delancey, who played Q, basically played a god, is an atheist in real life. You know, maybe it's not ironic. Maybe it's something that we ought to expect. Because
I think the way he played the role extremely well, though. But I don't think a theist would have played the role as well as he did. I think, but partly due to the fact he was atheist, he was able to play that role with a lot more
freedom,
pizzazz than because he didn't have any preconceptions about God or what God would be like or anything like that. So he was able to really give some clarity to the role.
Now, how did you guys interpret the character, not only the character of Q, but also the Q continuum as a whole? Did you think that, like, would you view them as gods essentially, or were they being presented as gods?
No, I don't think they were. I've debated a lot on this, and because there's obviously people who say yes, they were clearly gods, but then there's people like me in my camp who were saying, well, no, they weren't portrayed as gods at all. They were portrayed as the most technologically advanced species that there is.
Yeah, they were omnipotent. He was an
basically the
omnipotent
pinnacle of
prankster.
evolution.
Yeah. I think.
So,
he was like a prankster, like an omnipotent prankster. So he could.
Yeah. But that was just Q, the character. That was because the boredom of being
and
omnipotent.
actually,
The continuum
and that was
itself
only Q in the
was not
beginning.
pranksters. The continuum
Right.
themselves were there to maintain order in the universe.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Mm-hmm.
They were kind of like the Guardians in the Green Lantern universe, but even Q himself, he started off as a prankster, but he wasn't always a prankster. Like the character evolved, if you'll pardon the language, to be something much more than that. Because he was really kind of guiding humanity a lot. He was guiding.
Now that's a good point. Did you ever read the Q Continuum books?
I did not.
No, so I've read the Q Continuum books, and they actually go really in depth into this as to behind the backstory to Q, the Q that we see in the actual Star Trek, and the backstory is so 65 million years ago, at the time of the asteroid that hit Earth, Q and female Q that you see in Star Trek Voyager. Were battling another omnipotent life form. I can't remember the name of this life form, but they were
Was
battling...
it one that we had seen? Was it one that we had seen before, like on the show?
I'm not sure. I think it's one that only appears in the books.
Okay.
So they're battling this other omnipotent life form, and as this other life form throws a large asteroid towards female Q. Q comes along and diverts the asteroid to stop it hitting her. And the asteroid hits into Earth, which causes the extinction of the dinosaurs and dramatically changes the course of events on Earth.
It's already a better Bible story.
Yeah. As punishment for causing, but for having that battle and then causing the death of an entire species. The Continuum put Q in charge of Earth. They put him in charge of making sure that that doesn't happen to Earth again, and that a new species evolves and is able to come to intelligence. Which is why
that's amazing.
Bored.
That's brilliant.
That's really awesome. That's really imaginative.
Yeah.
And it's funny, Katie, because I never interpreted Q as, I did. He's clearly bored. He does tricks and plays games to entertain himself, but I never interpreted all of his behavior as just boredom. I always looked at it as a combination of boredom in terms of the way that he does it, but he always has like a lesson there for humanity,
Yeah.
There were numerous episodes, even in the beginning, even in the pilot, where he puts humanity on trial for the crime. He puts Picard on trial for the crimes of humanity, being a savage race. What he's actually doing is he's giving Picard the opportunity to prove that humanity is better and is evolved, and he's also kind of inspiring them to stay evolved and to keep evolving better, This is kind of a repeating
keeps
theme.
with the backstory.
Right.
He's guardian of humanity. He's guardian of Earth.
He introduces them to the
invested
board.
interest in and he does that. If you follow the backstory, he does that because there's much great humanity sort of become arrogant. That that they don't need to worry so much about the problems out there. They've got a good system and everything, but they're not developing defensive technologies the way that they should be to fend off against some of the bigger predators that Q knows is out there.
Right, because they exist in peacetime. They made peace with the Romulans and the Klingons. They're the most powerful, technologically advanced society that they know. So to them, yeah, they can just rely on diplomacy, and we'll beat everything and make everyone part of the Federation in the future. That's kind of how they were thinking.
Yeah.
And then Q's like, you have no idea. You are these tiny little specks of dust in one spot in the universe. You don't even know anything. Here, let me show you. And then he shows them the Borg, who, by the way, started their invasion like after that. You started seeing, the Borg come. So he did give humanity a taste of its arrogance, but he also gave them a taste of, hey, you need to start preparing yourself for the threat that is out there that assimilates people.
I would definitely suggest reading the Q Continuum books, because the Q Continuum.
How many are there?
I think there's 3. It's called the Q Continuum. I think there's 3 parts to them, but they were written obviously before Star Trek, the TV series. They were written like back in the 70s, 80s. So.
Oh wow!
Yeah, they're an old series of books.
Wow!
But it's where they get obviously the backstory to the Q characters.
Right. And the other Q, it seems that they have a system to where they all keep each other in check. Because one Q can't just like run amok and do whatever they want, which would explain why Q didn't just like snap all the Borg out of existence, right? Like if he was worried about humanity, he could just solve humanity's problem for them and get rid of all the Borg.
So this is a question: so if that's the case, like Star Trek overall, are they kind of suggesting a sort of objective sort of ethic or morality when you think about all of these? Because even the Federation has certain rules put in place that kind of sound similar, like you don't go and fuck with people, you don't go and do things,
Well,
my opinion, go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I think the thing that they're trying to get at is that it's not really an objective morality per se. It's about allowing evolution to take its course and to not interfering so the Prime Directive don't interfere in other species developments. The Q
that
have a similar thing where it's don't interfere, keep order, but don't interfere with the course of things. If the species dies out, they die out. If the species is going to continue on existing, then don't get in the way of that. It's all of the objective things that you're talking about are more along the line of just the only objective
like
fact
goals.
is existence.
Yeah, like the goal is to let things take their own natural course. That's the goal. Okay.
Now, I actually think that Star Trek is great in a lot of all the ways we talked about, but I do think it shoots itself in the foot in one area, and it does have to do with the Prime Directive, because what they're trying to do. We talked about how Gene Roddenberry views religion, and they want to get people to use critical thinking and appreciate science and respect other cultures and all this stuff. And that's all well and good. But the way that they start treating the Prime Directive, they become very dogmatic about it to the point where it's not just a rule book. There's a line, even Picard says it, where he's lecturing someone else on the Prime Directive. He's like, the Prime Directive is not just a set of rules, it's a philosophy, and it's a correct one, and it's just complete dogma. And so and they're treating it in such a way to where this is the Bible. You have to obey these commandments.
An absolute standard,
and the problem with that is there's a lot of moral dilemmas that are caused by the Prime Directive. Like they have to sit and like watch innocent people die sometimes, and it's like, is that the morally correct?
Janeway takes that way too far in Voyager. The
She's
Prime
the
Directive
worst.
is a rule. It's like
she was hardcore about it.
She's the worst, because not only does she's super hypocritical. This is why I like Star Trek Voyager, and I like Captain Janeway in some areas, but I did not like her hypocrisy as a starship captain, because she was the first person to yell and scream, "You get Prime Directive, no!" But she would also be the first person to break it. Have you ever noticed that?
Oh, yeah.
She violates the Prime Directive in the first episode, the pilot.
Yeah.
The thing that gets them stranded, like in the Delta
She breaks it, but then argues that her actions are all because of the Prime Directive.
The principle
So she
of
was
it,
trying to uphold the Prime Directive by
she's a
breaking
giant
the Prime
hypocrite.
Directive.
Yeah, giant hypocrite.
And she gets to decide because she's the captain. Well, that's not how a Prime Directive works.
Works.
Either it's the rule or it's not. You can't just you can't be the only one to decide when it gets broken, because then that's not an objective standard. It's like God. It's like when God says, "Thou shalt not murder." And then he tells these other people, but you can murder these people in my name.
And I think the writers realised that, so far through, because then if you remember the episode, the 2-part episode Equinox.
Yes.
Yeah, they sort of brought that in to sort of back Janeway's.
She's the worst
handling of the Prime Directive up a bit by bringing in this captain who just completely breaks the Prime Directive in the most obscene way possible.
Right. I don't know if you've seen this one. I don't know if you've seen this one, Scott. But basically, it's what Katie just said. They're in the Delta Quadrant, and they find another Federation starship that got trapped with them somehow. But their captain, their ship is older or not as fast, but yet they still cover the same
interplanetary vessel.
Yeah, but yet they still covered
5 and.
But they still covered the same distance somehow. So they're trying to figure out, well, how did you make it as far as we did? You shouldn't have been able to cover that. And so it turns out that their captain found some alien species whose body is made of energy. And so basically they were abducting them and killing them and using it to power their warp engines to increase efficiency. And then the Voyager crew found out about it. And she's incensed at this. She's like, you have violated all of the principles of the Federation, and she's going off on her tangent, right? But so basically what the guy did was terrible. He was a terrible captain who made a terrible moral decision, but she's in no position to give that lesson, because she did exactly the same thing in the first episode. It wasn't as brutal what she did. They didn't show the destruction that she left or the harm that she caused to that.
But she did cause harm, yeah.
But she doesn't know what she did, because she just destroyed the space station that had the technology on it, so it wouldn't fall into the hands of this other group who was at war with this other group. And then they left. So she could have wiped out both of those civilizations by doing that,
Right, and she didn't take any ownership of the situation.
And we never actually hear what happened to the Acompa.
No, because they left.
Yeah.
Yeah. She didn't ask any questions. She just made an arbitrary decision. Nope, I'm going to decide that this is the way these people are going to do it. By the way, that was just one episode. There's another episode called The Omega Directive, which she completely disregards the Prime Directive, because the Omega Directive supersedes the Prime Directive.
Then again, she is following the Federation's ruling on that, so that wasn't her decision.
That part isn't the problem. The problem happens at the end of the episode, where she destroys a civilization's source of power that powers their entire civilization, because Starfleet deemed it too dangerous, and she was following the Omega Directive, in violation of the Prime Directive, but that's what Starfleet told her to do.
Yeah.
So she decided to interfere with this alien culture, ruin their whole power supply, and then left. So she probably doomed at least 2
should have done further research onto it, because I thought about that when I watched that episode, and I'm like, she says at the beginning of the episode when Chakotay is asking her about the Omega Directive and what would actually happen in the Alpha Quadrant. And she says, well, in the Alpha Quadrant, it wouldn't be me who would be in charge of this. The
it would be like a counselor
have their own team that would deal with this. They would come out and liaise with me and tell me what I need to do, because they're fully trained and constantly getting training on this. So that it would be like multiple captains that would take it on. And she doesn't do any further reading. You're like, well, you're thinking in your head, well, shouldn't you be looking into the database and seeing what it is that they would be saying to you in this particular situation? Oh no, just the Prime Directive. The Prime Directive is receded. The Omega Directive on page 1 says this. Right, we're doing this. That's.
Do you know when she says that? By the way, Katie, because I remember this episode. She says that Tuvok, the Vulcan, the only logical person on the ship, apparently. As soon as she's about to do it, he warns her. He's like, you're about to violate the Prime Directive by doing this. And then that's when she says, the Prime Directive is rescinded because of the Omega Directive. And I'm making a command decision. So she says that. Guess who else? Guess what other time that the exact same thing happened in the pilot? Right before she destroys the space station, Tuvok says, "You're about to violate the Prime Directive," and she's like, "But it's for the greater good." So she's just a complete hypocrite.
On top of that, she actually puts down the Omega Directive says, I think it was something like 5 kilotons of.
I can't remember.
Let's just say 5 kilotons, yeah. So 5 kilotons of explosives is what's meant to be used on the torpedoes to destroy the Omega particle. And Tuvok's okay with that, but then he questions her again when she comes along and says, no, let's just up it to 8. I want to make sure that it's completely destroyed. And I think he says something like, well, you do realise that is going to cause severe damage to the civilization.
Yeah, and then she said, what does she say? Like, she says, just do it, or something like that. Like,
just do it.
Omega Directive takes precedence. If any of these particles survive, then it could totally destroy the civilization. So,
So basically, Janeway is playing God in a lot of these episodes. And sometimes she's doing it for her crew, but usually she's doing it just because they don't really explain why. Like the reason her rationale for acting in a lot of the episodes doesn't really make any sense. In the pilot episode, her decision made no sense, but I guess they had to have a way of getting them trapped in the Delta Quadrant, and that was the best story they came up with. She also violates the Prime Directive in the last episode, by the way, Endgame, which Star Trek took that title before Marvel did. But yeah, so she violates the time travel Prime Directive because a lot of problems can be solved with time travel. So really, but a lot of problems can be caused with
that comes into the problem with consciousness, now, doesn't it? Is it still the same Janeway from a different timeline? Is it?
I mean, I would say, with consciousness, I would say that this is the way I envision it. This is not scientific. This is not even testable, right? Going back to the transporter for a moment, I view the transporter as killing somebody and then creating a duplicate, a new person. Like that's the way I view it. Like as soon as you step into the transporter and you're beamed anywhere, you're dead because all of your atoms have been transformed into energy. So whatever pattern was you no longer exists, and then it's recreated in some other way, but that's not you. That's just a new version of somebody who shares your physical makeup. And so that's a philosophical problem. But in the case of Thomas Riker, where he's like split, you're actually killing the original Riker and you're creating 2 more Rikers, and each one thinks that they're the original. The experience, the conscious experience that they're having, or the qualia that existed for probably a split second, the person would be experiencing being in 2 different places, and then it would fade as all their experiences start anew to where they don't even remember that there was another. They'll just assume, oh, I was just on that planet, but I've been beamed up, so now I'm here. Or I thought I was being beamed up, but I guess the beam must have reflected back down here. Where no, actually you were in 2 places at the same time because you're all the neurons, all the electrons that are representing your thought processes were exactly duplicated in exactly the same way at the same time for 1 microsecond. And then everything about you changed.
Did you ever watch the? Well, it's only a new series. The new cartoon that they did, the Lower Decks.
I have not seen that yet.
Oh well, there's a joke in it where one of the crew members from the Lower Decks is asking, "So how do the transporters actually work?" and his lieutenant explains how the transporters actually work, and he's like, so does that mean there was actually like 2,500 different Kirks?
I like that. I like that they see all of the not problems, but all of the questions that
The
like fans,
dilemmas.
the dilemmas that fans would be asking about that. I kind of envision time travel as sort of branching multiple timelines.
Yeah, branching
Yeah,
timeline.
so Daniel's the character of Daniel shows that quite effectively because there's multiple different Daniels. You see him die
Oh, that's
multiple
right.
times. And then
Another
he comes back
storyline that
as
they
another
never.
version of
Well,
himself who has no memory of
Yeah,
himself.
it's so
and-
funny. You talk bringing the Star Trek stuff up, and especially that part. I was watching today when I got home from work. I was watching Don't ask me why. I was watching Sean Carroll's lecture on his parallel timeline theory, and then he goes into like time travel and different, but then he talks about basically I think someone says it seems like the parallel universe idea somehow it violates some logical rule. Like it isn't that like an identity contradiction of identity, because if you are the same person in this universe in infinitely other universes, then there seems to be some kind of identity problem. And then Sean Carroll says, well, every time you make a decision, a new universe is born. That's what he was saying. He's like, every time you make a decision, there's one that doesn't do it. And so it splits off. It's like and so the identity collapses. It's no longer there.
Yeah.
So that solves that dilemma.
Do you guys remember? I don't know if you ever watched this, but there was a TV show about 10 years ago now called Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles. Did you watch that
yes,
one?
I vaguely remember it. Yes, I watched
That
it at
was,
the time.
which was a great show, a good sequel to Terminator 2. The only good Terminator sequel they've had after Terminator 2 was that show, in my opinion. But there's an interesting storyline going on in that one where Kyle Reese's brother, who's Derek Reese, is from the future, and he comes back in time to basically stop Sky. It's the same mission, right? And then he hooks up with Sarah Connor, and they team up, basically. But then there's another episode, like in the next season, where his girlfriend from the future comes back in time. And he finds her there, but he's not expecting her. And they like run into each other, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And she's like, "I came back because of the mission." And he's like, "What mission?" And she's like, "To stop this guy who captured you and tortured you." And he was like, "I was never captured and tortured. What are you talking about?" And she thinks that he's just like had PTSD, like he blocked it out of his memory because it was so traumatic, But then it turns out she came from a different future.
Timeline, yeah.
She came from a different timeline because him traveling back to that timeline created a new timeline. All the changes that he had been making in that timeline created a different future that she came back from. And so their memories of the future are different. Like they still both know each other, but they remember different events where certain things happened in one timeline and the other didn't. And then they figure that out at the end. And he's like, well, shit, you're not even my, girlfriend or whatever. You're just, you're not even from the same universe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was pretty interesting the way they did that. But the idea is that, every time you go back in time, you are changing just your presence being there. If you interact with anything or anybody or do anything, you have created a new timeline.
A new timeline. It just gets
When it comes to the grandfather paradox, that's what I've always said whenever I've been discussing grandfather paradox with anyone. Is something similar to that you would be able to go back and you would be able to kill your grandfather.
Yeah, you absolutely would.
The events that where your grandfather exists would still exist because it's already happened. But it would also be a parallel universe, which a parallel timeline, which also has your grandfather dead and you not existing.
Right, and you created it by causing that timeline.
Exactly.
Right? So as soon as you leave your timeline and enter the past, you're creating a new timeline.
Yeah.
It didn't do anything to your old timeline that you came from. You're just creating a new one from that point on, right? And so now you have parallel timelines where,
and obviously we don't know one way or the other because we've never done it, but
this is not scientific.
Thinking about like the other fundamentals of the universe, like the speed of light limit, which is a constant. It would make sense that there would also be a constant in that scenario as well. The universe would have a way around of doing that.
It's so weird. It's like the same technology for warp drive. I guess they're talking about bending space-time by creating like a warp bubble,
because
so that you can
move
safely
quicker than
you can kind of wrinkle, like wrinkle up the rug, so you're not going there. You're kind of bringing it to you.
Yeah.
In that
Space
scenario,
can travel quicker than the speed of light, but particles cannot travel faster than the speed of light. Unless it's negative particles. If they've got negative mass, then they can travel faster than the speed of light.
But then we have I think information can travel faster than light.
When you say, well, it depends. What do you mean by information?
Like quantum entanglement.
Yes.
So in principle, if you take like spin up on this side, spin down, and let's say you separate an atom, and this one's spin up. Then even if you take the other previously connected part of that photon or that particle all the way like million light years away, once you change its configuration to be like spin down, then the other one will automatically change to spin up faster than light. It'll change like instantaneously. They call it quantum non-locality.
And we know that to be a fact because we've actually done experiments where on one side of the planet we've done that, and then the other side of the planet we've had an entangled particle, and it has been proven true.
See, this is why I like having scientific friends, because you guys are like talking way over my head, and I'm learning new shit about quantum entanglement. So this is good.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that you can actually have quantum entanglement in two different states. So you can actually have it where the other particle does exactly the same as the first particle. So you can have them doing exactly the same, or you can have them doing the opposite, reacting with each other.
Quantum
computing.
Instantaneously
do the opposite to each other.
Yeah. It's really amazing. When you
said information, I thought you were talking about like radio signals and being able to talk to each other. And I'm like, no, that actually
that's physical. Yeah.
It travels close to the speed of light, but it's like 97%.
When we're saying information, we're talking about the information between two different particles. How the
the state of something, like if the state of a particle is it spinning down, that's its information.
I didn't know that we could know the state of a particle.
Isn't there something unless you observe it?
Yeah, exactly.
Uncertainty
so a particle acts as a wave if you aren't observing it. So at that point you cannot know the state because you're not observing it. As soon as you observe a particle, then it takes one state out of the many states that it could have. So think of it as probability. So if you're not observing it, probabilistically, it could be any one of the possible states it could exist in. As soon as you observe it, it becomes a determined particle, which then it's determined to be that one state and only that one state.
Is this related to Schrodinger's cat experiment?
Yeah. So Schrodinger also did an experiment called the double slit experiment, where he fired. You can do it with photons or electrons. So usually it's done with. Back in the day, it was done with electrons. So you'd have an electron gun, which would fire a series of electrons at a board with two slits in it, and what they noticed is that you'd fire one electron, but the data would show multiple different electrons acting as a wave, or what appeared to be multiple different electrons as a wave. It wasn't until you observed it actually became an electron again.
That's so weird.
Really spooky. Yeah, Einstein hated it. He said it was spooky action, and he said because it violates classical mechanics. It's just a total contradiction.
I don't know where that echo came from all of a sudden. I think that's Katie.
Oh, that could be me. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So, did we go through all the Star Trek shows? Other than we didn't get to the
Well,
new ones,
we haven't
Discovery
been
and
through it all,
Picard.
but I think, we should. I was thinking of doing this as a series, so doing a couple of other episodes where we discuss more in depth the Q, more in depth of the Borg. We have covered a bit to do with the Bajorans. I would like to talk. I think the time discussion was quite interesting, so going more into the whole time wars and all of the philosophical problems with time travel and things like that.
Right. And we didn't really get to talk too much about playing God in the sense of who watches the Watchers was the episode that I wanted to talk
Yes,
about.
you wanted to talk about that, didn't you?
We can do that next time. Though
Yeah.
we've been going for a
That's
while.
a good subject there.
I don't want to bore
we've
people.
been going
to
an
death.
hour and a half now, so
Yeah. Let's do it next time.
Been fun, man.
well, thank you very
Sweet,
much
that was
for
fun.
coming on. I've enjoyed this tonight.
Yeah. I love these kind of topics, man.
All right then. Well, thank you very much. Oh yes.
All right.
Yeah. Beam me up, Scotty. You should have had prepared your little your green screen in the background and then beam yourself out.
Have
with
some
a-
stars. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe next time.
All right then. Thank you very much, everyone who's been watching. And as I said, I've got a debate between Scott and Cindy on the channel on Saturday. So tune in for that because we'll be obviously talking a little bit more serious topics there. This was
What are you guys
just,
debating?
So I'm going to take a Christian position and debate
Okay.
Cindy. She's atheist. So I'm going to be arguing the transcendental argument for God.
Okay.
Interesting.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I don't know
no.
if that was supposed to be a secret or not, but
Oh, no. It's no big deal.
Could be fun as well with
Sweet.
you acting as the Christian.
Yeah.
Trying to steel man the position.
Because, a lot of Christians have been, lately especially, they've been trying to tell me that the reason I'm not Christian or the reason I'm not agreeing with them is I simply just fail to understand the argument.
Whereas if you
So
can
I'm
prove
like,
you can
dude,
steel man
I
their
could
argument-
probably, and I'm like, I could probably argue your position better than you are right now.
yeah.
Like, you just have no idea.
But then, I like playing along with the nonsense sometimes. Sometimes I
Yeah.
just like going along with, well, if I'm failing to understand it, whose fault is that?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it my fault or is it God's fault?
Right.
Do
See,
we
there
get to
might be a little
choose?
bit of a kickback on this, though. Like, so, oh, how dare you try to steel man our position and
You think so? You think that's what?
blaspheming against our God?
I wonder if they would interpret it that way. That didn't even occur to me.
I can imagine a few of them might.
Some of them
I
might,
wouldn't.
yeah.
Not all, obviously. I mean, there's certain
Right.
Christians that are going to be. They're going to enjoy watching that. So.
I know Victor, the guy, Victor Vargas, remember I was debating him, Katie, a while back.
Oh yes, the whole.
Yeah, so he was following my whole thing about arguing the Christian position, and he was like, "So you're a Christian now?" And I'm like, "No, I'm just arguing the other side." He goes, "Why would you can't do that?" He just couldn't understand how I could do that.
He's an
like,
atheist.
"No, he's a Christian."
Oh yeah, that makes sense why he wouldn't understand.
Yeah, he's like,
you
can't-
should do that.
Yeah, he's like, "You
Every
can't do that."
atheist should do that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's how you get to atheism.
exactly.
Steelman Christianity, you have to know, one, what the arguments are. You have to know what the defenses are to the arguments, all of the counter arguments, so that you can evaluate them for reasonableness. Figure out whether that's the stronger argument or whether the atheist argument is stronger. And when you do that, you usually arrive at atheism. But you can't do that if you never steelman your opponent's argument. If you only use bad arguments, then what are you really doing?
Right. I mean, it's human nature. It's hard for us to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. So this is a good way to train to do that, to kind of try your best to put yourself in their shoes and argue from what do you think they're coming from and see if what happens.
You weren't an apologist in the past, were you?
Well, all Jehovah's Witnesses were kind of
to some
apologists.
extent, but did you actually go knocking on doors and
Oh, yeah.
trying to convert? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well, then
every
never mind.
Jehovah's Witness has to, otherwise you're not counted as a Jehovah's Witness. It's part
Yep.
of the...
Gotcha. Right.
Oh, yeah. I would
Okay.
sit down and get invited to functions like to argue against Jews and Catholics and evangelical preachers, and
Mormons.
so I would take Mormons, and we would take like elders with us, and
That's funny to me for some
oh
reason.
yeah, we just go at it, man.
Seeing Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons like
We used to
convert
have
each
a couple
other.
of at my Kingdom Hall. We used to have a couple of Mormon missionaries every time. So every time they sent the missionaries out to do, because they do like a year's work, don't they? Each set of missionaries, they've got to be sent out to do things, and they always used to send out a couple of missionaries as the first place that went out to do the work was to come and visit the Kingdom Hall. And
Why? Why would they do that?
Punishment.
Don't know. I think just a punishment.
Or amusement? One. I don't know. That
See how
seems like the
other
last place
half
you would
lives, I
send.
suppose. It's
It just seems like the last thing that you guys should be trying to avoid each other. Not you guys. You're not witnesses anymore. But I feel like they should be trying to avoid each other at all costs because they're using similar tactics and they're preaching different things and they're both easily susceptible to teachings. Why would you risk sending your own? They could just fall into the other person's trap, you know?
Yeah, we all Mormon or Latter-day Saints and Jehovah's Witnesses and Mennonites and who's the other group? The Seventh-day Adventists. We all come from that same generation of late 19th century. What do they call them? Apocryphal movements. That
We
came
all
about
came
around
from the
that.
Millerite movement.
All came, the Millerite is the first ones, yeah. So we came out of that same catalog of Christian flavor or whatever.
Yeah.
Wow.
The end of the world is coming.
End of
and
the
we know
world's
the date.
Oh,
We know the date.
that was the common. That's the common connection. I didn't realize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear the last part. And you said, "And we know the date." Right.
Well, that's what
Yeah,
it used to be.
dating.
So
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses
Okay.
took a different stance when the Jehovah's Witnesses formed. But before that, all of them were like, "Yeah, we know the date. It's going to happen on this date, this time." Then
Now, how did
obviously
they-
Nothing ever happens.
You were a former witness. I'm curious, how did they reconcile that with the part of the Bible that says, "Of the day or time when these things occur, no man, no one will know, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son himself. Only the Father knows."
That's
Is that in
specific
it?
to
Should
a
I look that
certain.
up? Is that
Well,
in the
yeah,
Bible?
it's specific to a certain. Like Jesus at that time, he was talking about the end of the Great Tribulation. So he was talking about when Jesus would actually come back and start destroying the world. So the Jehovah's Witnesses would predict when Jesus came back or came in his kingdom, which is a separate event.
Oh, so
so-
they make it two different things.
So they were pre-trib Christians, basically, pre-tribulation Christians. So they would say that first Jesus has to sit on his throne and Jehovah has to put him on his throne. That happened in 1914. And then that's when World War I happened.
What does World War I have to do with?
That was the big prediction. It's when Jesus ascends to his throne, there will be wars. There will be nation will fight nation, and blah blah blah. And so, at 1914, that was really what gave the Jehovah's Witnesses a lot of confidence, because Rutherford, he said, "Look, in 1914, Jesus was going to ascend to his kingdom, as predicted by Daniel." On the 69 weeks or whatever from the time of Jerusalem's fall, which lands us exactly at October 1914. So he says, and so what we're going to see is the sign. And Jesus says, when he ascends to his kingdom, you will hear of wars, great wars and earthquakes and pestilence and all these kind of things. And these are the last generation. And so then what happened October 1914?
And they weren't the last generation.
Of course, that's where they really messed up. So,
well, actually, what Jesus says that to He's talking to the disciples when he says that, right?
Yeah, so this is the
And
thing.
he's,
So, right. So he said, look, he goes, surely I tell you, this generation, not meaning the ones sitting in front of me, the generation that I'm referring to, the ones that are around when I ascend to my kingdom will not pass away before all these things are completed. So they
how
said,
do they
so,
get to that interpretation?
well,
They just,
yeah, so it's kind of like a play on words. Again, you can post hoc interpret stuff.
that's
So you
true.
go back
Yeah,
and Jesus says, he goes, and they were asking him, so what about this generation that you're talking about? And he goes, well, this generation, I will ascend to my throne in heaven, and this generation will start to see signs in heaven, and talks about the wars and the nations fighting against nations and earthquakes in diverse places. And he goes, surely I tell you, this generation will not pass away before all these things occur. So he was pointing to that generation the guy was asking about.
Yeah.
And a lot of Christians will say, or a lot of, I don't know, scholars are saying he's trying to tell his people, your generation will not pass away, which is the people in the first century.
Yeah.
But then they wrote it in such a way, I think the church fathers kind of wrote it in such a way that it would mean, no, the generation that I'm referring to in the story will not pass away. And Jehovah's Witnesses just ran with that and said, yeah, this generation begins 1914. So when World War I kicked off, they were like, see, there it is. There's the sign. And then the big, what was that big plague that happened in 1919?
the
Influenza, the Spanish flu. Yeah.
the Spanish flu. Yeah.
So this is the other part. This is the black horse. They called it the black
With
horse.
your camera, okay.
Oh, my dog rolled over in asleep and knocked the bloody camera over.
Oh.
So yeah, that generation, they try to say that they're still around to even today. Like the people of 1914 are still alive. And so the end should be happening any day now. But it's like, it's been over 100 years, guys.
I just think that I think that the Jehovah's Witnesses proved the failure of prophecy in general, using prophecy as a tool, and the failure of biblical prophecy in particular, because if they were able to interpret World War I as the wars and rumors of wars that Jesus spoke about in Matthew 24, that proves that what Jesus spoke about was so vague that it could be mistaken for any war in any generation at any time in human civilization. And if your prophecy can be mistaken for anything, then it's not a prophecy.
And it goes even further,
they'll say, and
now they use the argument. They still use the argument today, Jehovah's Witnesses. So they'll say that, oh, now we have coronavirus, so that this is the pestilence that they were talking about. But we also have wars. Look at the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and all the other countless wars around the planet. That's the wars that they're talking about. And
when was
food
there not
shortages,
wars?
look at this, and famines, look at over at this, and fires and stuff. Let's look over at Australia and shit. We'll just point at anything.
The U.S., California was on fire, and that's proof that God hates the gays, right?
Yeah. It's crazy.
God says he will scorch a third of the earth. And this even proves it.
I wonder what these people, like, do they not know that wars have always happened? Like, all the time?
No critical
but they're not
thinking.
as bad as they are today. They're not as bad as they are today. Without realizing that today we know of all the wars instantly.
Not only that,
then,
but they're also wrong. Just according to, they're scripturally wrong as well. Because in the Bible, the wars of the past involved genocides to where entire civilizations were wiped out. Now, I don't know how many people you think that to be, but a genocide is instantly worse than any other war that's not a genocide.
Yeah.
By virtue of it being a genocide. If a genocide is happening, the reason why genocide is a war crime today is because we recognize that this is the worst possible situation that could happen and to be avoided at all costs, right? So you don't commit war crimes by wiping out innocent men, women, and children.
They're not bothered about that. They're so small-minded, narrow-minded when it comes to this. that they'll even take something like a war with a few hundred deaths as being instantly worse than what was happening in the past, simply because it's happening today to them.
Yeah, they can see
It's
it. They can perceive wars happening. We have the exchange of information. We have instant news to where back in the day they didn't. People didn't know what was happening in China.
mm,
If you weren't in China, you know, 300 years ago, you have no idea what was happening in China. You only
exactly.
learned about it when they wrote books about it. But the wars in Africa, like, does anybody know what wars are going on in Africa right now? I want one of the Jehovah's Witnesses to talk to me about the wars that are going on, raging for decades in these war-torn African countries. That's war. That's not rumors of wars. That's actual war. But you're
Yeah,
not talking about that. Why wasn't the beginning of the end back when those wars started?
yeah, exactly.
When did we not have war? Like, I don't like, when on this planet did was human civilization not at war with some other human civilization?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, that's what's
We need to
happening
beam
on
out of this episode, don't we?
Saturday. Is Scott's going to be discussing the Christian position in a debate. Have you got
Yeah.
anything coming up in the next week, Bryce, that you want to show out?
I have an episode of on my new show. So I'm doing two shows right now. On Promethean Secular Frontier, we're doing obviously Secular Soapbox, and we spent a lot of time talking Star Trek today. Next Tuesday at 8, we will be talking Star Wars,
Mm.
and because it's Star Wars Day, so
All right.
yeah, we'll talk a little bit of that and kind of do a similar thing. I won't be able to stick around long though, because Tuesday's normally the day where I do the Bryce is Right on my other show on Tart, or Tang, we're calling it now. And coming up on that show, we have a discussion with a panel of African Americans who are all former Christians, current atheists, and we're going to be talking about what it's like to be Black and an atheist at the same time,
Mm.
and coming from a
Mm,
culture that's highly religious.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be an interesting discussion, and I encourage people to tune in for both of those.
Awesome, man.
lovely. Well, thank you very much for everyone who's been watching. I did notice I had a couple of new people in the chat today, so welcome and thank you very much for tuning in. If you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe. And as always, please remember, ignorance is never bliss. Thank you and good night.
Good night.
Right.